Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. You can now subscribe for direct access to all our shows online at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Your subscription sustains the TV production of Uprising. A few years after the Occupy Wall Street movement, a group of intrepid former students have decided to go public about the overwhelming debt they owe for their college education. A campaign called Debt Collective has announced a debt strike by a group of 15 students who are publicly refusing to pay back their federal and private college loans as an act of protest. The students all attended institutions operated by Corinthian Colleges, Inc., a nearly defunct private for-profit higher education provider. Dozens of Corinthian colleges have closed down, and the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and others have even sued the company. Some students involved in the debt strike were in the middle of obtaining their degrees when their institutions shut down, leaving them with no degree and lots of debt. The Department of Education apparently has the power to forgive Corinthian student debt, but is unwilling to wait any longer. The Corinthian 15, as they're called, are taking a public stand right now. Student debt as a whole has reached epic proportions nationally, with more than $1 trillion owed by former students as of now. The burden of debt has significantly impacted the ability of young people to move out of their parents' homes, start their own families, and achieve financial independence. Joining me in studio today is Nathan Horns. He's an organizer with Debt Collective and one of the Corinthian 15. Also with us on video is Hannah Apple, also an organizer with Debt Collective and an assistant professor of anthropology at UCLA. Welcome to Uprising, Nathan and Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Nathan, let me start with you. Can you tell me what your experience with Corinthian was, and, what sort of degree were you pursuing? What sort of debt have you incurred? And did they shut down before you got your degree, as was the case with some others?
Okay. So my experience with Everest was the same as...
And Everest College is owned by a Corinthian.
Corinthian, yes. So... Corinthian and Everest is the the campus that I went to. And basically what my experience is the same as any other student. I went to school, I did the homework.
What was your degree in?
Business. Mm-hmm. I got a bachelor's in business administration, and
so you managed to complete your degree?
I completed my degree. The school, literally, I was the class that was right before the shutdown. So now all these things are happening, and the school's under fire. They're being investigated, and I graduated just recently, right before that happened.
And can you say how much you owe?
$68,000.
$68,000.
Yes, ma'am.
And how does that impact your ability to just live?
I can't. I live in a studio apartment with my aunt because I cannot afford to pay rent. I pretty much lost everything after going to that college.
And of course, these days, getting a degree is no guarantee of jobs
Absolutely
or any
not.
Financial security.
Absolutely not, and that's the reason why I went to Everest. They said that they would help me find a job. They would help me. They had a network of employers waiting for me as soon as I graduated, and it did not happen. They did not do what they said they were going to do.
I want to turn to Hannah Apple. Hannah, I understand this campaign came about because some of the folks involved in Strike Debt, which was this sort of campaign arose, originally from Occupy Wall Street. We'd covered it on our program, and Strike Debt had been collecting donations to buy up other types of debt, but also college debt from banks in order to forgive people's debts. They wiped out millions of dollars of debt, and by many accounts, that's pretty successful. So is this the sort of next step, Debt Collective, where people are actually literally saying, we're not going to pay as a way to up the ante?
Absolutely. So the program you referred to was called the Rolling Jubilee, and we have actually abolished $30 million of both medical debt and student debt simply because what's called distressed debt is available actually for pennies on the dollar on secondary markets. But that was always, the Rolling Jubilee was always kind of a spectacular tactic. We wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that their debts were not worth what they thought they were worth. So now what we want to do, the fact is we could never buy all of the illegitimate debt sloshing around on the market. For example, federal debt to these horrible predatory for-profit colleges is not available on these secondary markets. So having done that, having drawn the attention to debt as a systemic issue and student debt as a part of that, now we want to say, look, debtors acting collectively actually have a tremendous amount of potential power. Right now, we all deal with our debts with shame, with isolation, with all of this sort of moral baggage. And the debt collective, Strike Debt, before it has always aimed to shift that shame and isolation to the possibility of collective action. So debt collectives, debtors unions are absolutely the next step. We're so excited about the Corinthian 15. They're just an incredibly brave, strong, intelligent group of people, and we think we're going to win, and that's going to set a real precedent for the collective action of debtors going forward.
So, Nathan, what does it mean for you to take the stand? Because, I mean, there is, as Hannah was saying, the sort of moral baggage associated with debt, and people in this country really feel very strongly, personally, about having to pay off one's debt is extremely important. Other people in other countries have a different cultural approach, I think, to going into debt. But then there's also the practical price you pay for getting your, having your credit scores be impacted, which then affects your ability to take out further loans. You must be paying a bit of a price for this.
There's a very big price to pay. And we've spoken with attorneys. We know exactly what we're doing. We know what we're getting into. And we're prepared for those consequences because we know we're doing the right thing. And for me, it's just, I refuse to pay a debt to somebody when you've done something that is not only immoral, but it should be illegal. You used us, you abused us, you lied to us.
And what way did Corinthian abuse you? I mean, you did get your degree, right?
Okay, so yes, I went to the school and I got a degree, but there were times where we're playing Monopoly as a final.
Huh?
Yes.
So you're saying the quality of your education
The quality of the education
poor.
was very poor. There were students that would come to school for the 2 hours that they were asked to come to school out of a 4-hour class and leave, but they still got the same grade as me. Or there were
And then
teachers,
once you were done, how was your degree viewed by potential employers?
I went to Wells Fargo to try to apply for a job, and they laughed at me in my face.
Because of your degree?
Because of my degree. And then come to find out Wells Fargo is a very big contributor to Corinthian College.
But they don't even take their degree seriously.
But they don't even take the degree seriously.
Huh. So Hannah, you mentioned that you're confident that you can win, but what exactly are students and activists like yourself trying to win here? Is this action to refuse to pay debt meant to pressure the Department of Education to forgive all federal debts?
I mean, I think we want to think strategically and tactically, right? So with the Corinthian 15, they were effectively led into a predatory lending trap. It was a debt trap. So and it is well within the Department of Education's existing mandate. In other words, no laws would have to change for the Department of Education to discharge the debt of every single current and former Corinthian student. That is already within their mandate. When debt is incurred under fraudulent circumstances, and as you mentioned in the beginning, the Corinthian Colleges is being sued by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's under investigation by something like 21 attorneys general. I mean, it's in serious trouble. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has looked into it. By all accounts, this school was fraudulent. It was hardly a school. It was a for-profit corporation masquerading as a school. And it is very obvious to all of us, and not only those of us who are activists on this issue, that these students' debt should be discharged. And that, I think, would then help us set a precedent to think about how debtors can act collectively, both to refuse illegitimate debts and to begin to renegotiate and reimagine kinds of debts that may be legitimate, but in which we might want to renegotiate interest rates, et cetera.
So actually, let's talk about that, because what is legitimate versus illegitimate debt, Hannah? Because even though someone might get their degree from a reputable institution, but find themselves, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, not be able to find a job, even if the institution may not be at fault, as Corinthian seems to clearly be, we have a societal problem here that really should be looking at the student debt as something that's dragging not just students, but society down.
That's absolutely right. So there's a real danger in this particular campaign, the Corinthian 15 campaign, that could look like Corinthian is a bad apple, right? Or could look like even for-profit schools are a bad apple, and as long as we get rid of for-profit schools, everything will be okay. And that is fundamentally not the case. The system in which I am a professor, the venerable University of California system, used to be public. Meaning you used to be able to go here as a citizen of California for an affordable price. And at this point, most of my students are graduating with $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 in debt. Most of them as the first people in their college to have gone, in their family to have gone to college. And even institutions that were never public, New York University, for example, the way that higher education across the board has gotten involved in the financial sector, and the way that tuition consequently has skyrocketed as universities like the UC system get involved in interest rate swaps and get on the wrong side of these things. In other words, the skyrocketing price of tuition at all schools across the country has become a systemic problem for individuals, right? For the individual debt burdens of Nathan, of me. I have a tremendous amount of student debt, more than Nathan, actually. And so what we need to do, right, we have suddenly become a class. We have suddenly become a class of people who can get together. We have a tremendous amount of leverage to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a systemic problem, and we now need a collective seat at the table in order to renegotiate it. And as you said, I think the interest can be shared insofar as we will be, for people who like to think in these terms, a tremendous drag on the economy going forward.
Right. And a related story, but outside of the scope of our discussion today, is how adjunct professors are being treated as a source of extremely poorly paid labor as well. There was a walkout this week. Nathan, do you hope to expand the Corinthian 15 beyond the 15 of you? You're one of the 15, and are you hoping that this action that you're taking will inspire not just other former and current Corinthian students, but even other students saddled with college debt to join you and say, I'm not going to pay this anymore. This is ridiculous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want everybody to know that this is not just the Corinthian 15. This is anybody who feels like you went to college and you didn't get what you deserved. This is anybody who wants to stand up for their rights. And that's what I feel like the Corinthian 15 is about. And we have been growing and we have been expanding. And that's the best part about it, is it's not just the Corinthian 15. We have over 1,000 people that have joined us. And that's amazing.
1,000 people who have said that they're not going to pay their debts?
That have said they're not going to pay. They have signed up to strike.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so among our audience, if there's people who are considering doing this right now,
join us.
I mean, what do they risk? Do they risk debt collectors coming and knocking on their door? Well, I don't know, knocking on their doors, but at least hounding them on the phone?
There are ways around that, though. And we can help you. Go to debtcollective.org, and we will contact you, and we will let you know the real, exactly what could happen, and how you can go about not paying these loans, because you shouldn't have to pay illegitimate loans.
Well, Nathan, best of luck to you. Finally, Hannah, debtcollective.org is the website that Nathan mentioned. Anything you'd like to add as well in terms of encouraging students? Are there professors who are supporting students? Because, technically, the fees and tuition that students pay, part of it goes to paying professors.
That's right. That's absolutely right. This is my salary at stake, and yet many of us professors also have a tremendous amount of student debt, right? So we can't imagine that people stand on one or the other side of this issue. Yeah, I just have two quick things that I'd like to say in closing. I love Nathan's enthusiasm, and as he said, and as you said, Sonali, please come to debtcollective.org. Right now, we are intaking strikers for the Corinthian 15. We are very mindful of the very serious legal and financial and personal consequences that going public with a strike can, that attends to deciding to go public. And so we have a very careful intake process for students. So if you are a current and former Corinthian student, you can sign up for this particular strike on our website. For the rest of us who have federal loan debt from Sallie Mae or Navient, you'll also see a place to sign up. The final thing that I want to say is that the debt problem today is not only a student debt problem. And the Debt Collective aims to organize debtors, both student debtors, but far beyond that, right? People whose homes have been wrongfully foreclosed on and who are now renting the homes that they once aspired to own and still paying bank fees. None of those people have seen justice in a collective way, right? Our nation is radically skewed. The power structure in our nation is radically skewed toward creditors, people who are taking out payday loans and vicious cycles of check cashing. Our criminal justice system in Ferguson, Missouri, 40% of that budget comes from criminal justice fines. And if you don't pay those fines, if you are a criminal justice debtor, you go back to prison. So debt is a systemic issue and an incredible potential platform for organization. So we start with the Corinthian 15, we move to Sallie Mae, we move to foreclosures, we move to criminal justice debt. In other words, it's a very much a systemic, our vision is a systemic vision.
Well, I want to wish the two of you the best of luck, and thank you so much for joining us today. Hannah Apple joining us via Skype, an organizer with Debt Collective and an assistant professor of anthropology at UCLA. In studio with me, Nathan Horns, an organizer with Debt Collective, one of the Corinthian 15. This is Uprising. When we come back, we'll go to Wisconsin. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. 4 years ago, Wisconsinites revolted in response to a draconian measure gutting many hard-won labor rights. In an occupation of the Capitol that lasted weeks and drew as many as 100,000 protesters and international news coverage, ordinary people in the state of Wisconsin rose up against anti-worker sentiments pushed by Republican Governor Scott Walker. Since then, Walker has been able to stave off a recall effort and win re-election. Perhaps emboldened by that, he's pushing a controversial bill now curtailing the power of organized labor once more. Under the euphemistic title of the right to work, Walker and his fellow Republicans are fast-tracking a bill that would make it illegal for unions to collect mandatory dues from all members of a bargaining unit, even if those members benefited from the union's power. Such laws have passed in numerous states around the country, but in some states, such as a law in Indiana that Wisconsin's law is closely modeled on, they've been struck down in court. Well, just how close is Wisconsin to disempowering its unions? Joining me to answer that question is Jeffrey Summers, Associate Professor of Political Economy and Public Policy in Global Studies and Africology at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Welcome to Uprising, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Now, what exactly does the bill in question stipulate, and could it really strip Wisconsin unions of real power?
Oh, of course, it absolutely will. Now, this has already been done with the public sector workers with 2011, which was the reason that we had these very, very big protests. It was regarding this Act 10 law, and that essentially stripped public sector workers of these rights. So now Walker is following up with private sector workers with this right to work legislation. Now, it should be said that the police and the firemen are actually exempted from this. So these are the two sectors that I guess will not have the right to work, in the language of the Wisconsin Republican Party.
And so that's quite interesting. And of course, these are traditionally unions that the right has often called upon and allied with. How do they justify this difference between these two sort of groups of organized workers?
Well, they really don't. And of course, it really represents a massive contradiction between their rhetoric and the reality of what they're doing. So, of course, they want to have these two sectors, the police and the firemen, loyal to them. And, of course, the governor seems to think that perhaps, I guess, the police are a kind of Praetorian guard, which need to be treated well. But of course, if one looked at it purely from the perspective of the discourse of the Republican Party in Wisconsin, we would say that they're being treated terribly, that they do not have the right.
Right, exactly.
So it's quite hypocritical and almost funny.
Right, because the Republicans are saying that this is something that they're doing to help workers. And let's just clarify for our listeners what we mean when what Republicans really mean when they say it's a right to work state is that when a union comes in or when there is a workplace that is unionized, the bargaining unit that's part of that workforce is supposed to pay union dues. You're not supposed to be able to check off necessarily whether you want to pay union dues or not. You're either part of the union if you want to be in that workplace, or you're not in the workplace altogether, because everyone benefits from the union's their bargaining power. And they collect dues, and those dues go into keeping that union powerful, also go into helping the union do their own political lobbying. And now they want to make it voluntary, those dues voluntary rather than mandatory. And it sounds like, of course, just a matter of individual choice. Is it?
Well, it would be like if you just didn't feel like paying your taxes.
Right.
So you just relied on your neighbors to do this. And of course, the more people that opt out from paying, the more that places the burden on those who actually are paying. So the goal here is to really destroy the unions, and of course they will do so. And the chief target is the Democratic Party. So in other words, labor unions are a significant funder of the Democratic Party, and so they don't want their opposition funded. So they're going this route. And one of the reasons that they will be increasingly successful is that as labor gets continually weaker, they can really confer fewer and fewer benefits on their workers. And so as wages just continue to go down, more and more people are just making the decision that they really can't afford to pay union dues when they're not getting the benefit of raises. So it really is eviscerating the power of labor unions.
And it feeds in on itself. Now, 4 years ago, the Democratic Party legislators took a strong stand. Many of them even fled the state so that they could say, hey, I'm not there for the vote, so you don't have quorum, you can't vote. I mean, this was a pretty serious protest. And, of course, outside the voting halls were people camping out, thousands, hundreds of tens of thousands, and in some cases 100,000 people. What are the protests looking like this week, both from the Democratic Party and ordinary people?
Sure. Well, there's not going to be another fleeing, of course, because this just will not do from the perspective of the Republican Party. And so it's much smaller. I mean, we haven't even seen protests in the thousands. I mean, so we are not going to see a reprise of 2011 here. It's really a fait accompli. I mean, it's going to be done. The state Senate has passed it. The state legislature will pass it next, and the governor will sign it. It's a done deal, unfortunately.
Now, they fast-tracked this bill, I understand, and there was only one public hearing. The Senate Labor Committee was supposed to have a public hearing, and people were organizing around it, and all of a sudden the vote was done and it passed the committee. Can you tell us the sort of farce that's playing out in terms of the democratic discourse that should be taking place on this?
Yeah, well, I think from their perspective, they see themselves as having been elected, and once elected, they can just do whatever they want. So the public are, kind of a nuisance, and from their perspective, are representing a minority interest in the state. So, they won these electoral majorities, ergo, they get to rule and do whatever they want. So they're really not paying much heed to procedural niceties. Now, all of that said, we have to remember that there were massive amounts of external money that were spent here. And the state legislative district lines were redrawn, and there was a very serious kind of gerrymandering of districts, which was done to make the Republican majorities even bigger than they were. That said, I don't want to give the impression that Scott Walker is not popular. He definitely is. He won a general election across the entire state. So gerrymandering has nothing to do with his victory, but it certainly does with the state legislators and the state Senate.
Now, what about addressing this law in court? I mentioned the Indiana law that this is modeled on was struck down in court. Can Wisconsin courts actually strike this down?
I don't think that's going to happen. The composition of the courts is such that it's just highly unlikely.
And so then how far have such laws spread around the country, and who can we point the finger at? Alec, the Koch brothers, both?
Oh, well, absolutely. And similar organizations. You have to remember that in Wisconsin, we have this kind of dualistic character. It's kind of like a Brazilian soap opera with this evil and good twins that are coexisting. So, we've had this very progressive tradition with figures like Robert La Follette and others. And then, we've had Joe McCarthy, and we've also had, the industrialists, which were the initial founders of right-wing think tanks in this country, such as the Heritage Foundation and the Bradley Foundation. I mean, this is where they were born. They were born among these industrialists here in Wisconsin. And so this is something that they've always wanted to do. I mean, it defunds the Democratic Party from their perspective, especially in local elections, helps to drive down wages, but that goal has already been accomplished, so that battle they've already won. So it really seems as though it's a means to perhaps reduce the amount of money that they have to spend on elections to defeat Democrats.
So what about the fact that Scott Walker has his sights set on the White House? Does he see the pushing of this right-to-work law as a campaign issue that he can ride on to Washington, D.C.?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, before you actually win the presidency, you have to win the primaries and the caucuses. So he has to win the votes of the extremists within his party. And he's doing that. I mean, if you've seen the latest polls, he's just pulled away by some 10 percentage points from the rest of the pack. He's done several things which, in my estimation, have not been in the interests of Wisconsinites. So, for instance, even though I'm not personally a particular fan of casinos, in the southeastern part of the state, there was a casino that was proposed by the Menominee tribe, very, very popular among the residents of southeastern Wisconsin. They really wanted it. Governor Walker hesitated to make a decision in the year before the decision needed to be rendered. Right after the election, he then said no, and this was only some 6 days after receiving a letter from 600 GOP social conservative activists in Iowa, which of course is the first caucus, stating that their opposition, and he just rejected it. Not only that, but they were going to bring forward some $220 million to help finance a new stadium for our professional basketball team, the Bucks. Now the taxpayers of Wisconsin will have to pick that up. Furthermore, with Medicaid, he's rejected those funds from the federal government. So that's going to cost our state some $241 million over the next 2 years. We're a small state, some 5.6 million people. So Wisconsinites are paying massively, and by that I mean the taxpayers. We are really, really, really paying for this governor's White House run. Now, whether or not he'll be like a Ronald Reagan figure with the kind of Teflon coating and these things just slide off him, hard to say.
Well, we shall see. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Jeffrey Summers, and shedding some light on this very troubling trend. And we'll certainly also see how it plays out around the country. Thank you so much.
Sure, you bet. Take care.
My guest, Jeffrey Summers, is an associate professor of political economy and public policy and global studies and Africology at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And we've been talking about the so-called right-to-work laws that are being pushed through in Wisconsin and around the country. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Darren White is our research intern. Alexander Hobbs is our technical director. Christian Beck is our production assistant. Federico Garcia, Kiana Turner, and Jonathan Alexander are our audio engineers. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Your subscription sustains the TV production of the show. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kohatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. See you tomorrow.